The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Yes, hello, good evening. How are you doing out there? This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews. We are back for another live stream. So, good evening. I hope you're all doing very well. I hope you had a lovely day. If you're in England, we had sunshine. Remember that? We got some. It came back out of nowhere. I was up at 5:30 this morning. I was walking down the woods, saw a couple of deer, got my feet on the grass, and it was all dewy and kind of cold and refreshing. So I got my day off to a good start today. I had a strange dream last night, and in that dream there was a ginger woman, and that dream took place in my town where I live, my hometown. And so I got up this morning, I woke up from that dream, and I went to that place where my dream took place in the town, the same sort of street and area, and I saw two red-haired women there. And then I went to the woods and carried on with the rest of my day. So strange things going on in the dreams. I hope if you're having dreams out there, pay attention to them and interpret them. And there could be some messages or some interesting things going on. I don't know much about dreaming or what it is, but I do know that if people are prevented from sleeping and from dreaming, then they tend to go completely insane. So there is some benefit to it. And if you are somehow manifesting things that happen in your dreams like I did today, well, hopefully that's a good thing and you're having good dreams. If you're having nightmares, then try to avoid manifesting those. There's plenty of people in this world who are trying to manifest nightmares without our cooperation and encouragement. And so I don't think we should help them along in that scheme and that plan. But it's very lovely to be back, and I hope we are in for a good show. So I'm just going to get my windows and my browsers all correct and in the right place because I just closed them all. So tonight, what are we doing? We're carrying on with Fabian Freeway. We started this on Tuesday night. It feels like last night. Yesterday just flew by. Pretty busy day, but we're here and we're carrying on with part 2. So we did the introduction, we did chapter 1, although I think it was labeled chapter 2. If I'm not mistaken, we're actually on chapter 3 tonight. And that's what we're going to do. I think we're going to get through another 2 chapters. I've got a little bit of a preamble ramble to look at and get through with you before we dive into the reading of the book. So first thing I will mention, you just saw there on the waiting screen as you were listening to some acoustic guitar music that I have an offer, which is if you join the mailing list, I will send you a link to download some of my acoustic guitar music. It's a bundle. It's about 3 hours worth of tunes. Most of them are acoustic. There may be some they're all acoustic guitar, but there may be a few in there with vocals and lyrics as well. You'll have to download it and dig around to find out. But if you're interested in that, joining the mailing list so we can stay in touch in future in case any censorship wipes this channel out for whatever reason, then that's my little thank you, my gift to give back to say thank you for showing interest and taking part in Hayes Reviews. Because I think it's very important what we're doing here, and I believe in it and I love it and I hope to share it with as many people as possible. And that, in this day and age means that you're likely to have a target on your back when it comes to censorship and cancellation and deplatforming and these kinds of things. So that's one thing I wanted to mention, and the details for that will be at the beginning and the end of every stream. So I don't need to repeat what you've got to do there if you're interested in that. But there is a mailing list, and pretty soon I'll have a proper web page for capturing those emails a bit more professional like. But for now, until I have that It's old school. You got to actually open a browser window and type in it and create new email and send it and type words and the old fashioned way of doing it. So that is there if you're interested. What else did I want to talk about up front? Well, I'll go over to the article camera. So this is my YouTube channel. We are currently multi-streaming to Odyssey and Rumble as well as YouTube. If you prefer those two places, then you can have a look for those links. The best place to do it is to have a look here on allmylinks.com. This link will take you to all the others, the Rumble, the Odyssey, the various platforms and places that I do stuff. But the thing I wanted to highlight now that I forgot to highlight last week, well, one is our schedule, broadcast schedule, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays at 7 p.m. Live. And we usually go for about two to 3 hours, depending on how much rambling I'm doing as an intro. But the other thing I wanted to highlight was this playlists tab. If you go onto here, you will find all the previous books that we have read so far. We started with The Open Conspiracy by H.G. Wells. That's a 4-video playlist. We went on to The Romance of the Rothschilds by Ignatius Boller, 6 videos. Then we did Bertrand Russell, and that was 5. Lusitania by Colin Simpson was 10. Story of the Rockefeller Foundation by Raymond B. Fosdick, that was 13 videos. And now we are on Fabian, Freeway. And I have a feeling this might clock in at a good 16 or 17 videos because it's the longest book that we've done by far. The other playlist I have is this one down here, Hayes Reviews Lives. When I started streaming, I was experimenting more with a kind of review of news stories and sort of analyzing them and picking apart the propaganda and then giving you some better alternatives from where to get learnified and educated on the agendas that are unrolling, that we're living through, the script that we're living through that Alan Watt so often refers to is the fact that we're living through a plan and a script, and we're sort of told that everything happens organically and it just comes out of nowhere and no one could predict these things, when actually these things were planned and written down in books a long time ago, and that's why we read books on this channel. But I just wanted to highlight that playlists tab on YouTube. Currently, all these playlists and videos do not exist on Odyssey and Rumble. That is a job on my to-do list to get these all downloaded from here and uploaded over there. So right now, if you want to catch up on the previous work, you got to go to YouTube, unfortunately, until we get another place to host that. But as I mentioned before, we've got allmylinks.com. If you click that, it's going to open a new page, which looks like this. And this has got ways to donate and support if you feel so inclined to do so. And then a link to the Telegram group where we have lively discussions and exchanges of information and resources, and that's a lot of fun. Instagram, where I post pictures of books and summaries and little sneak peeks between the covers of what's in these books. And then we got the YouTube, the Rumble, the Odyssey, where I'm currently live streaming at the moment, and some crypto addresses if you feel like supporting that way. And then 3 links at the bottom that I don't really use that much, but they're there in case you want to sign up and keep in touch that way. Who knows? One day I might have to rely on one of these 3 if the other things go kaput. So that is it really for the housekeeping. So Fabian Freeway, we started it on Tuesday. I think if you were here for that Tuesday broadcast, you will be in agreement that socialism is quite a thing. We spent the first hour or so just pouring through the Wikipedia page on socialism. And I don't know a lot about socialism. I don't know a lot about isms in general. But I do know that they get thrown around a lot. People argue about them. They tend to be blamed for things that happened in history. And socialism is one of those things that divides people. And it seems to be a key issue for the left-right divide that we get thrust into, and that a lot of people believe in, this sort of illusion that you have to be on one side or the other. You're either on the left or you're on the right. You're either conservative and traditional and all stuffy and a bit of a prude, or you're left-leaning, you're liberal, you want new things, you want to be progressive, you want to stick up for minorities and have lots of free love and all other sorts of things. So there's a left-right divide, and socialism plays into this and predominantly falls on the left. And so we went through the Wikipedia article, and the thing that stood out to me from that article was how socialists and early socialists positioned themselves in opposition to among other things, capitalism, to religion and Christianity in particular, and to individualism. So if there are any individualistic Christian capitalists out there, this book should be of interest to you, because it is all about the antithesis to your worldview and position in life. If you like doing business, if you like providing value and service to people and fair exchange, you like to employ people and give them ways to provide for their family and loved ones, then socialism is against what you are into. If you are into the worldview that prioritizes the individual and the rights of the individual, and as opposed to the rights of the group, then socialism is against you. And also, if you're a Christian and if you believe in the Bible and you have a worldview centered around a creator who has revealed his will to us, then socialism is against you. And that is what I learned from Wikipedia. And so if you don't like how I just summarized it, then take it up with Wikipedia. Get in there and edit it and change it, because that's what Wikipedia is all about, is being an unreliable, editable, ever-changing source of information that everyone in the world relies upon, that can be edited in real time in order to suit the agenda of whoever it is that has been given the keys to the kingdom in terms of authorship on that platform. So once we went through the Wikipedia article on socialism, we also dove into the book. We read a little bit about the introduction, and the thing that stood out to me that I tabbed up in this book that I couldn't help but laugh at, and I'll actually just go over to the book and show this, because it really did give me a chuckle, and I've highlighted it up here, is this bit here about in the past 30 years. So this was written in 1966, okay? The book. So in the past 30 years, so from the 1930s onwards, a whole series of loaded epithets has been invented for that purpose, and that purpose being to shout down the people who are questioning the motives and the means and the ideology of socialism. These epithets have been invented to shout down opponents and critics of socialism, beginning with reactionary in the early 1930s and proceeding through fascist and McCarthyite to Birchite. At present, right-wing extremist is the automatic catchword applied to any person who seeks to expose or oppose the socialist advance. So this right-wing extremist, this is going on today in the present day. If you are all about, okay, let's get married, let's settle down, let's have children, let's homeschool them, let's get some cows and sheep and goats and grow our own vegetables and be self-sufficient, then you're a right-wing extremist. And I'm not even joking about that. That is the narrative that is out there, and that is the criticism of people who want to do that sort of thing, that you're a right-wing extremist. And here in England, we often get the association planted in our minds between nationalism and right-wing extremism. So if you fly St. George's Cross, if you're proud of your country, if you are skeptical and resistant to the mass importation of people from other countries, if you want to know who they are and why they're coming here, and you want stricter controls over who's coming into the country, then you're a right-wing extremist. Not my opinion, just that it tends to be the label that gets thrown at people who raise these kinds of issues. So it just made me chuckle that this right-wing extremism, this label that is used to shut down debate, shut down discussion, to silence people, to make sure people are their arguments are not even considered. Because if you throw that label at someone, a large proportion of people are just going to say, well, I don't have to listen to that person because they're a right-wing extremist. Same as if you throw the label racist at someone. Someone throws that at you, now I don't have to listen to that person because they've been called racist. Same with all these words that end with phobia and phobic. Or conspiracy theorist, oh yeah, all that conspiracy theory stuff. These labels are all used by people who do not want to look at the evidence and think critically about the issues that are on the table. And it's used to dismiss and to belittle and to put down and to write off and to, well, dismiss. I already said dismiss. I ran out of synonyms there in that list, but dismiss is the main thing they're used for. So that's a game that's been going on since the 1930s, so almost 100 years that's been happening, and it just gave me chuckle. It gave me a chuckle because Rose L. Martin was pointing that out so long ago, writing whole books and mentioning that in her introduction, and it's still happening today. So that's a little spiel, and I'm going to get into the preamble ramble. Just have a quick check in the comments. And good evening to Gwen and Heidi and LJ. We had some people further up. Anonymous is here. Lovely. We got Frank Lennon. Hello, sir. And Richard Morris. Hello. Adam's here. And I think that's everybody I can see in there so far. So thank you all for being here. I appreciate it very much. I could even have a little quick mosey on over to Rumble. We've got 6 people watching on there, but nothing in the chat. So thank you to you 6 anonymous beauties for being there. And on Odyssey, we got nobody watching. So what's up with that? That's not a surprise, though. I only have 5 followers on Odyssey. We all know YouTube is terrible and bad, but we're just all addicted to it anyway, and we can't stop using it. So shame on us. All right. So let's get into the preamble ramble and do some learning. So, if you remember, the chapter we read, part 1 of this book is all about how Fabian socialism grew in Britain and how it was founded by a small group of people. And we learned a little bit about this group of people. They were bored. They were atheists. They were middle class. They were from they weren't from the upper echelons of the high society, the really important bloodlines, but they also weren't sort of, peasants and farmers either. They were middle class, pure middle class. And they were struggling from a kind of lack of meaning in their lives. I think they'd probably been indoctrinated with the Darwinian worldview of scientific materialism, and they found that lacking. And they were looking for something to give their life some meaning, some project, something to get involved with that would kind of satisfy what I would call, their soul, their passion, their spirit. But they would probably deny that soul and spirit exist, and they would give some other word for it. But that's basically what we were told, what Rose Martin told us in that chapter. And they had their first meeting in 1888. And it was at this gentleman's house. His name is Edward R. Pease. And so I thought we would do a little bit of learning about him. And that could be our sort of introduction before we jump into the book. So Edward Pease, English writer and founding member of the Fabian Society. His early life, he was the son of devout Quakers. And he was the 6th of 15 children. Which is a lot. Now, it turns out these 15 children weren't all by the same mother. His father had 5 and then remarried and had another bunch. But still, that's a lot of children. That's a lot of competition, brotherly and sisterly competition. I've never been in a family with that many children, or I can't imagine what it's like. But it's a big family and a lot of competition, I would imagine, for the affection and the love of the parents, and yeah, I thought that just stood out to me. And so his father was a wool comber, and his mother came from the Fry family, known for manufacturing chocolate. So if you're in the UK, you might have heard of of Fry's Turkish Delight. This is something that my granny likes to eat. It's kind of like a rose-flavored jelly wrapped in chocolate. But that's the Fry family, and that's what they were known for. They had a chocolate business, and they eventually sold it and merged with Cadbury. And so Edward Pease, he was educated at home until he was 16. So that's quite interesting because he was homeschooled. He didn't go through, and probably at this time, I suppose the mainstream, government indoctrination center known as schooling probably wasn't what it is today. So he was educated at home. And then he moved to London, where he was taken under the wing of his brother-in-law, Sir Thomas Hanbury. So he was kind of one step removed from these higher levels of how can we say, the upper classes, the noble classes. And he had this brother-in-law who was a sir, and this brother-in-law arranged for him to become a partner in a stockbroking firm. So he was kind of connected, and he had some opportunities arranged for him. He lived a nice long life, though. Died at the ripe old age of 97, so that's good. Well played. And so in 1886, the death of a wealthy relative meant that Pease received a sizable legacy, allowing him to give up work at the London Stock Exchange and devote time to his socialist interests. So that's always a boon, isn't it? When you don't have to worry about paying bills or making money or doing some sort of 9-to-5 drudgery in order to make ends meet. You got that weight lifted, and suddenly you've got all this time to sit around and sort of pontificate and put the world to rights. And and so that was quite lucky. And imagine if this wealthy relative had not left this money to Pease, we could be living in a very different world now. But he did that. Or she did that, and this is the way it panned out. So he moved to Newcastle upon Tyne after leaving the stock exchange, and he formed the National Labour Federation. But his attempts to convert the working class to socialism were unsuccessful, so he returned to London. And I lived in Newcastle for a number of years. Great people, I loved it every second of it. Had a great time there, and I could just imagine him sort of this posh boy from down south going up there trying to extol the philosophies and the intricate workings of socialist thinking to people, to these rough Geordie types, shipbuilders sitting in pubs drinking their pints of ale, and probably were just telling them to piss off. So he had an unsuccessful jaunt up in Newcastle, and then he went back to London. And then he must have, it doesn't say when or how, but the next thing it tells us is that he traveled to the United States with Sidney Webb in 1888. So Sidney Webb and Beatrice Webb were the also founders of the Fabian Society, and they also founded the London School of Economics. And look here, it says Sidney James Webb, 1st Baron Passfield. So I didn't know that Sidney Webb was a baron. Interesting. So this man, Edward Pease, he's one degree removed, I would say, from these kind of elite, I hate using that word, but self-styled elite families, these precious bloodlines, the ones that keep it in the family, the Huxleys, the Darwins, the Galtons, right? It seems to me that he's sort of just on the outside of that, but obviously making inroads and getting a good name for himself and being invited to travel around with Sidney Webb, the Baron. So in 18, and then 2 years later, he is appointed the secretary of the Fabian Society, and he edited the Fabian News, and he wrote 10 pamphlets, including a tract on liquor licensing, and he wrote a pamphlet called The History of the Fabian Society, and that was published 1916. With Sidney and Beatrice Webb, Pease was a trustee in the fund used to found the London School of Economics in 1895. This comes up all the time, and this has popped up in so many of our videos, particularly the Bertrand Russell reading. We talked about this quite a bit as well. But interestingly, Pease was also a member of the Independent Labour Party, which became the Labour Representation Committee, which became the British Labour Party, which is the main left-leaning, although it's not really, they're pretty much the same in this day and age, aren't they? But the left-leaning red colour political party. So he was very much one of the main creators of that political party, which is going to this day. There's selections going on right now as we speak, and he served on that committee for 14 years. In his family, he had 2 children. He got married and he had 2 children. Michael S. Pease was a geneticist. So this kind of feeds into our studies and learning about the Rockefeller Foundation book, where we saw that it charts that time between eugenics becoming popular and a trendy thing amongst these high society people, to it being like, oh shit, we're gonna have to rebrand it because of tiny mustache man over there. And then it became molecular biology and genetics. But it's not hard to make that leap. You've got the word eugenics, and then it becomes genetics, eugenics, eugenetics, and you got that word gene in there. So it was kind of a sort of rebranding of a kind. But it just stood out to me that this gentleman's son was a geneticist, and then he also had another son called Nicholas, which I'll just say is a good name. Nicholas is Greek, and it means victory of the people. If you didn't know that, now you do. With his wife Marjorie, Edward Pease established the East Surrey Labour Party. They had a home at Limpsfield, which was called the Pendicle. It's quite a strange name for a home. Pendicle immediately make me think of pentagram, which is a 5-pointed star. I don't know if this has anything to do with that, but Pendicle. And this became known as Dostoevsky Corner because he housed many Russian refugees who had been forced to leave their country because of their socialist beliefs. So he's housing Russian runaways who are getting persecuted for their socialism. So that is a little bit about the man whose house the Fabian socialists first met up in, right? So that's Edward Pease. And it mentioned that he did write a book called The History of the Fabian Society. So I thought I would see if I could track that down. Now, I found this copy, which is from 1963. So that's a good almost 40 years after it was originally published. So it's not going to be first edition, but that even that in itself was £70. A second-hand copy there on Amazon. So quite pricey. And this is a 1963 version, but that would be a good one to read because it's always good, like we did with the Rockefeller book. It's good to read about what they say about themselves in their own words, because Fabian Freeway. This is Rose L. Martin's research and reading and interpretation into the things that they've done and said. But to be fair, to see both sides of things, it's good to look at what they say in their own words, which is exactly what we did with the Rockefeller Foundation book by Fosdick, the president of the foundation, right? So that would be a good one to get hold of at some point. But, if you don't have £70 lying around to invest in a, what would that be, 60-year-old book, you can find the text on the Project Gutenberg website, the full text of the history of the Fabian Society by Edward R. Pease, and he was the secretary for 25 years. And there's 12 illustrations. So the problem, as always, with the digital copy, we don't know if it's been messed with or altered. At least this one we know has not been messed with since 1963. This digital one could have been changed, altered. You never know. But just a flick through the contents, the sources of Fabian socialism, the foundations, the early days. We got a Lancashire campaign here, which would be interesting for me to read because that's the county where I was born, where I'm from, where I'm currently residing. Chapter 6 is To Your Tents, O Israel. So maybe some overlap here with the Zionists. I don't know, or maybe that's just... But it's quite intriguing that they've got a reference to Israel when they are positioning themselves against Christianity and the worldview that there is a creator, and we just why appeal to this sort of biblical place that's mentioned so often in the Bible. Chapter 7 looks like a good one, Fabianism and the Empire. Then we've got Labour Party, chapter 8. And then here, chapter 9, it has the episode of Mr. Wells. Now, I'm thinking this might be H.G. Wells, but I don't know. It's the only Mr. Wells that I thought of that they could be referring to. Then we got the policy of expansion, which is chapter 10. And now chapter 11 is the Minority Report. So if you remember in Tuesday, we had a look at the Fabian window, this stained glass window that disappeared, right? Disappeared for, 20 years or something, and then reappeared suddenly in this art gallery. And on that, there's all sorts of symbolism. There's their crest, which is a wolf in sheep's clothing, and it shows them they've heated up a globe, so it's red hot, and it's the color red, and they're hammering it. They're about to hammer it according to their heart's desire. But there was a stack of books on that window, and one of them was called The Minority Report. So I want to know more about this phrase, what it means in this context, because this is so many years before the Tom Cruise film and Philip K. Dick short story or maybe novel. But there's got to be some connection there, right? So interesting. And then there's a few appendices. We got some contributions by Bernard Shaw. So I think that could probably be another very interesting and edifying read. Now, if you're not quite sure, if you don't want to go to Project Gutenberg, you can get quite easily a PDF of this. It's just under 200 pages. You can just search for it. I don't even need to link it. It's not hard to find. If you just search for that, you'll find the PDF very easily. But that would be a good one to go through sometime, I think. Okay. Last thing I wanted to put on your radar before we get into the reading of the book is this wonderful video, which was shared in the Telegram group and by Frank, actually, who's here tonight. So thank you, Frank. This is a little shout out to you. And I want to say thanks for sharing this. This is James Lindsay's podcast. And if we just wing it back there a second, I'll pause it on the title of this. So this video is entitled The Occult Theosophy of the United Nations. It's 2.5 hours long, but oh boy, is it interesting. What James Lindsay does here is he talks about how, well, let's let him explain it. He talks about how the United Nations is a religious organization and the religion behind it is a cult. Now, why do I mention this? I mention this because theosophy, which is the cultic religion, sort of philosophy and worldview behind the UN, that is something that our Fabian socialists were dabbling in and interested in before they all got together and formed the Fabian Society. And that was mentioned in passing, very briefly, in the book, in the last chapter that we read. It said that they had a brief interest in vegetarianism and theosophy and psychical research. And actually, she was talking about how these were movements which flourished for a decade or two and declined. And it stood out to me because theosophy didn't decline. Theosophy is literally what he says here. It's the religion of the UN, and a lot of people don't know that the UN has a religion and is a religious organization. And so I wanted to point that out because this does a really nice job of linking the theosophy with the United Nations and with the present day, with the things that we're seeing rolled out in the present day. So remember, the Fabian Socialist group believe in gradualism and slow change and planning over a long time. Okay, so the fact that there was this theosophy, which bloomed for a few decades, and then came along Fabian socialism, and then First World War, Second World War, League of Nations, then the UN, all right up to where we are today, the Sustainable Development Goals. There's this continuity there. There's this golden thread that goes through all of that. And I think this particular video does a really excellent job of telling you the present day state of where we're at. We're going back to 1966 here and the sort of 30, 40 years leading up to that time. But this is a really good one to check out if you want to know the present day situation of what we're facing. So yeah, The Occult Theosophy of the United Nations. That's on the New Discourses channel. And I thought I subscribed to this already. Well, there you go. I just subscribed. We'll give him a thumbs up. Oh, I did already thumbs up. There you go. So that's another really good bit of background information that I think ties very nicely, ties the present day to what we're reading about in this book. All right. So I think that is it for my preamble ramble. How does that all sound to you guys? Hope that came through loud and clear and you got to see those links. I'm probably not going to put links for that stuff underneath the video because it's not hard to find. It's very easy to dig all that stuff up. Quick search engine, type in the terms, and you'll get it. So what we got in the chat? Adam says you're with us or without us. Heidi's made a steamy garlicky alpine fondue. Wow. We're swapping cooking tips in the chat tonight. Heidi says, Alpine cheeses give vivid dreams. Well, I can tell you I didn't have any cheese last night before my vivid dream. So maybe I should get on that and then I'd be dreaming some really crazy stuff. So there's a bit of synchronicity going on, says Gwen. And yeah, labels are for the lazy, says Heidi. Yeah, they are. It's for people to avoid thinking and listening and paying attention to something that they've already made their mind up about. I don't need to think about that as conspiracy theory. I want to talk about whatever, sports ball, or the red blue team voting that's coming up. And it's sad that people get into that habit of doing that because they're missing out on like the most interesting topics in the world and the most exciting to talk about and explore and discuss, in my opinion. People would rather just talk about the latest TV show on Netflix or something. A World of My Own says fries, peppermint cream, chocolate cream, and Turkish delight. Sounds like you're licking your lips as you say that and having good memories of sweet treats. CESP made it. Glad you are here. Cool. All right then. CESP says check out the Cheshire Smokehouse. Cheshire Smokehouse. Okay. That's Cheshire, UK, right? I will make a note to do that. They do good cheeses. It's going to make me have crazy dreams. Make me have crazy dreams that I can manifest even more easily than I do at the moment. All right, sweet. Let's get into the book. We'll just have a quick check over on Odyssey. Yep, that's still going. And we are still going on Rumble. Wicked. So the multicasting is working, and we are successfully preserving this information in multiple places. Now, tonight's chapter has a great title, The Dangerous Fabians. So, this is chapter 3. That year, in the flush of his first faint triumph, Sidney Webb began courting Beatrice Potter, a statuesque and well-heeled bluestocking. The contrast between them, both in station and stature, was acute. Beatrice was one of 8 daughters of a Canadian railway magnate, while the mother of her pint-sized suitor had been a London hairdresser. Beatrice once dreamed of a quite different future, but an earlier romance with Joseph Chamberlain, the great reformist mayor of Birmingham, proved ill-starred. Sidney would channel her pent-up intellectual energies and resentments into a lifelong attack against the social class which had wounded her pride. Well, that's some pretty interesting just not justification, but sort of insight into why Sidney went down this route of socialism, which is very much the philosophy of socialism is like let's take from one group over here and give to this other group over there, and which is just theft or coercion or extortion, and so if you have something against the group over there and you can come up with a way to be like, we need to take their stuff and redistribute it and give it out, then you could see how that would be fueled by resentment and anger and bitterness. In 1892, this formidable couple, very clever, very conceited, as an acquaintance remarked, agreed to merge their differences. The marriage was something of a milestone in Fabian history. It was not only because Beatrice, by a fortunate coincidence, had inherited an income of £1,000 a year in Canadian railway stocks, which relieved Sidney of the necessity of earning a living and enabled him to concentrate with quiet intensity on undermining the system that sustained him. Okay, so there you have another Fabian socialist who doesn't have to work or earn a living or pay the bills or graft. So that makes 2. That's Edward Pease and Sidney Webb, both of them not having to work, pay the bills, bring home the bacon, and provide for their wives. Their union was also the prototype of a ménage soon to become characteristic of the Fabian set, the husband and wife partnership that applied itself with peculiar devotion to shattering the existing scheme of things and remoulding it nearer to the Fabian heart's desire. It permitted a pattern of radical feminism combined with domesticity, and it proved appealing to ladies of strong views. The Fabian movement always emphasized the importance of female support, both personal and financial, though it alienated some by its insistence that all but the most prominent women should do their own housework. With the publication of their History of Trades Unionism, which Lenin translated into Russian for his followers, the names of Sidney and Beatrice Webb began to appear jointly on a series of ponderous volumes intended to conduct the English-speaking world along the road to socialism. Their intellectual progeny were numerous, and the effect on their own and succeeding generations was considerable. In addition, Beatrice Webb was closely identified with the development of a product known as Fabian research. Organized fact-finding designed to lend weight to predetermined opinions was to provide the basis for Fabian propaganda, educational and political. Fabian research, as practiced by Beatrice Webb and her school, combined the turgid German type of scholarship, noted for massive detail and much admired by 19th century intellectuals, with a kind of airy legerdemain. And if anybody wants to chuck the definition of legerdemain into the chat, I would be most grateful. It specialized in researching conclusions on social and economic topics which were quite unrelated to the facts themselves. Hang on, let me reread that sentence. It specialized in reaching conclusions which were quite unrelated to the facts themselves. So this is the kind of thing that goes on in the modern day with scientific research. Is like we fund the research which gives the outcome that we want to find. So I think there's a bit of irony or tongue-in-cheek in that sentence there. These dangerous non sequiturs escaped challenge because the preliminary facts were often obtained from unimpeachable official sources and because they were so voluminous. Oh, interesting. So their method was to just gather massive amounts of official sources and data from those sources, and then come up with a totally unrelated conclusion and hope, I suppose, that most people wouldn't be bothered to go through the data to check whether it actually backed up the conclusion that they drew. The Fabian way was to bury an opponent, when possible, under mountains of exhaustive detail. I'm sorry I'm interrupting so much tonight, but this is something this reminds me of criticism that I've heard leveled at certain people, and I'm not signing on to this criticism. I'm not in the mudslinging business because I have major respect, but I've heard for some people, Whitney Webb, for example, and interesting that her last name is Webb, isn't it? And we're talking about Beatrice and Sidney Webb, but Whitney Webb and who's that other fellow, the Canadian guy who is married to Cynthia Chung, Matthew Ehret. What they tend to do is come out with this like machine gun like rapid fire of facts and names and dates and places, and it's like an overwhelm for some people, you know, and that could just be the way their brains work, that they are so loaded up with factual detail and they don't care about anything else, that it's just fact after fact when they speak, which to my mind is mind-blowing, and I'm really in awe of that. But some people can find it very difficult and challenging to follow along with that sort of style of information. So that sentence just reminded me of that conversation that I've had with people, this kind of burying an opponent with exhaustive detail. Fabian research supplied and then also, you know, Webb, Whitney Webb, Sidney Webb, Beatrice Webb. I'm not saying, I don't know. Just interesting synchronicity. Fabian research supplied the content for the educational material distributed by the society, a good deal of it in the form of tracts and pamphlets presenting the Fabian stand on successive issues of the day. At a later date, Beatrice Webb was made formally responsible for setting up the Fabian Research Department, which in due time became infiltrated by communists and in the end was abandoned to them. But remember, what we learned from Wikipedia was that socialism and what we learned was Karl Marx used the words socialism and communism interchangeably, and also that Lenin stated that socialism was merely the transformative step between capitalism and communism. So just interesting that a socialist group can be infiltrated by communists, given Marx and Lenin's usages of the terms. The decade of the 1890s has been poetically referred to as the period of the society's first blooming. The phrase is apt if one recognizes the movement to be a species of deadly nightshade rather than a wholesome growth. It is true that provincial affiliates of the society sprang up all over England and Scotland, and general membership soon exceeded 200, not a very impressive figure. In 1891, the society began publishing the Fabian News for members only, which is still published today being 1966. A scattering of Fabians sat on town councils where, as gas and water socialists, they agitated for municipal control of public utilities. They got themselves named to local school boards, where they did their bit towards steering the education of the common school masses into socialist channels. In London, Sidney Webb became a member of the county council, and Graham Wallace headed the school management committee of the school board. In those years, Fabian lecturers roamed the hinterland. Book boxes and tracts were shipped in bulk from the newly opened headquarters at Clement's Inn. All that bleak, superficial bustle helped to create an impression, still carefully fostered in the general press, that the Fabian Society was no more than a small, rather harmless, busybody organisation chiefly involved in fraternal squabbles. Nothing could be further from the truth. In reality, the society took only a passing interest in the new members who had drifted rather aimlessly into its ranks, and soon released many of them to other radical organisations of lesser status. While it was concerned at all times with creating a favourable climate for socialist opinion, the particular mission of the Fabian Society was to develop a socialist elite. In short, to discover and mould the leaders of an evolving socialist world. It is on this point, rather than on their gradualist procedure, that the Fabians appear to differ most obviously from classic Marxists, though the difference may be more apparent than real. Fabians have insisted from the start that in advanced capitalist countries like England and the United States, socialism must begin at the top and meet the industrial masses halfway. Hence, the Fabians' emphasis on leadership and their solicitude for higher education through which the leaders of the future were to be formed. The Fabian Society, which ceased publishing membership lists in 1945 to assure privacy to its many notables, has always contained the elite of left-wing society, open and covert. It was no coincidence that when the Labour Party finally came to power in England, figures like Ramsay MacDonald and Clement Attlee, Sir Stafford Cripps, Herbert Morrison, and a host of equal and lesser luminaries were found to have been Fabian trained. There was jubilation at Fabian headquarters when the first, though by no means the last, student group at Oxford was formed, and I just realised that there was a footnote, which I missed as we were going through the page. It's here. Okay, so it's up there. It says, by 1893, in addition to the Mother Society of London, there were about 1,500 members organised in over 70 societies. But on its formation, the Independent Labour Party absorbed most of these, and by 1897, only 11 local groups remained. Oh, so it's saying that there were all these small groups started by the Fabian Socialists, but then they were all brought together, and that's what became the Labour Party. And just a quick check in the chat, legerdemain means sleight of hand. Thank you, Adam. Appreciate that. And then CSP says, sleight of hand, also known as prestidigitation, or legerdemain, refers to fine motor skills when used by performing artists in different art forms to entertain or manipulate. Yeah, so that'll be the sleight of hand, making things disappear and then reappear, and, you know, look at this hand over here while this hand over here nicks your wallet. And then LJ has mentioned the film Prestige, which if you haven't seen that, I always describe it like this. It's one of the few, well, not few, but it's one of those films that is better the second time you watch it. And there's not a lot of film, because when you know what's going to happen, you know, a lot of the time the film doesn't have quite the same effect the second time or third time, but that is better the second time. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. Christopher Nolan. It's got David Bowie in it, who plays Tesla, Christian Bale, and Wolverine. So if you're into Wolverine and Batman and Bowie, that is your chance to see them all together in one film. And Frank Lennon says, young global leaders, Schwab's babies, Fabians, highly likely. Tony Blair is a Fabian. Yeah, exactly. Spot on. Then we got a World of My Own comment, which is the Minority Report of the Poor Law Commission by Great Britain. So that was a Royal Commission on the Poor Laws and Relief of Distress. Webb, Beatrice, printed 1909. Oh, thanks for chucking that in there. We got to learn more about this for sure. So that sounds like the title of a book maybe that you've thrown there, or maybe one of the pamphlets that they put out. Thank you for the comments. Back to the book. And I'll just reread this sentence. There was jubilation at Fabian headquarters when the first, though by no means the last, student group at Oxford was formed back in 1895. This one small chick caused more rejoicing than the whole brood of new provincial societies, since England's great universities were traditionally the hatcheries for members of Parliament and the civil service. By 1900, there were 3 more university groups, and as one academic generation followed another, quite a number of England's future rulers submitted to brainwashing by socialist tutors. In 1912, university students accounted for more than 1/5 of the society's membership. So they're definitely getting the youth through the universities and indoctrinating them with their ideology and their worldview. With the Cambridge group led by such obviously coming young men as Hugh Dalton, a future chairman of the Labour Party, and Clifford Allen, later chairman of the Independent Labour Party. The name Hugh Dalton rings a bell, but I'm not sure why. The priority which the Fabian Society gave to this proselytizing is evident from the fact that such leading members as R.H. Tawney, G.D.H. Cole, afterwards president of the Society, former Foreign Secretary Patrick Gordon Walker, and Prime Minister Harold Wilson taught for years at Oxford, shaping the young mind to the socialist idea. Another pilot operation begun in the 90s and steadily expanded to the present day is the London School of Economics. The circumstances of its founding are worth examining because they furnish so clear an example of Fabian duplicity at work. A benefactor of the Fabian Society, Henry Hutchinson MP, had committed suicide in the summer of 1894, leaving a hastily drawn will in which he bequeathed a trust of £9,000 to further the, quote, propaganda and other purposes of the society, end quote. As chairman of the society, it's so funny that he just referred to it as propaganda openly and without... I suspect, though, the word propaganda didn't have quite as much of a charge back in the day. Maybe it did, I don't know. As chairman of the society, Sidney Webb was to be chairman of the trust. But the will did not specifically authorize him to administer outlays. Without informing his colleagues of the precise terms of the will, Sidney proceeded to use the bulk of the money to establish the London School of Economics and Political Science. Ah, interesting. Nominally, the school was not established under the auspices of the society, which, however, retained indirect control. Okay, so the London School of Economics was founded by Sidney Webb with a bunch of cash left by a guy who killed himself, and he bequeathed that money to the propaganda and other purposes of the Fabian Society. Before taking this step, Sidney privately consulted the well-known legal authority R.B. Haldane. QC Haldane asked Webb point blank if he was still a socialist and if the new school would really advance the cause of socialism. On getting an affirmative answer to both questions, Haldane advised going ahead. That name rings a bell as well, R.B. Haldane. Nevertheless, the first director of the school, who had been selected by Webb, solemnly assured the London Chamber of Commerce that the school would not deal with political matters and nothing of a socialistic tendency would be introduced. And the footnote says, minutes of the Chamber's Commercial Education Committee. Oh, that's the source for that quote. So this is Webb saying no political matters, nothing of a socialistic tendency at this London School of Economics. That this pledge was honoured chiefly in the breach is evident from an entry in Beatrice Webb's diary of March 1898. The London School of Economics, she confided, is growing silently but surely into a center of collectivist, tempered research and establishing itself as the English School of Economic and Political Science, end quote. And that quote is from Beatrice Webb's book, Our Partnership, published in 1948, page 145. Since the Webbs themselves taught at the London School, it can be assumed that Beatrice knew the facts. Many other prominent Fabians have since served on its staff, including such leading lights of socialism as Harold Lasky, chairman of the Fabian Society from 1946 to 1948. Among Professor Lasky's students at the London School were two sons of a United States ambassador to the court of St. James, Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. in 1933 to 34, and John F. Kennedy in 1935 to 36. Like the Catholic Society of Jesus, which the Fabian Society, being secular and materialistic in its approach, does not otherwise resemble, the basis for future action was so firmly defined in its first years that its subsequent growth was assured. A contemporary once said of Ignatius of Loyola, quote, "When Ignatius drives a nail, no one can pull it out." End quote. Without attributing supernatural motives to the free-thinking authors of the Fabian Society, it can be noted that the essential elements of purpose, organization, and method on which the development of the Fabian movement depended were defined in its first decades primarily by those two profane zealots, Sidney Webb and George Bernard Shaw. Despite the increased tempo and range of its present-day activities, the Fabian Society has not deviated in any essential way from the patterns initially devised for it. It remains today, as it was at its inception, a dangerously subtle conspiracy beneath a cloak of social reform. Organizationally, the movement operated in ever-widening circles like ripples in a pond. The Fabian Society of London was the mother society, source of programs, directives, and propaganda which were handed down to the more variable local societies. The executive committee of the London Society constituted an inner circle with which the general membership enjoyed only fleeting contacts at lectures, meetings, Easter, New Year's, and summer schools or weekend seminars. Then came the hand-picked membership. And finally, there was a very much larger and continually expanding ring of sympathizers who supported immediate or long-range programs of the society in whole or in part. So this structure that they just described is rings within rings, isn't it? With that central small core group, and then a ring of people outside around them, and a ring outside of them, gradually getting bigger and bigger, which is reminiscent of the structure of the Cecil Rhodes Secret Society and the Lord Milner's Round Table groups, or at least how those groups are described by Carroll Quigley in the Anglo-American establishment. The influence of the Fabian movement, which has always been more real than apparent, cannot be measured by the society's limited membership, but must be gauged by other factors. Such factors, for instance, as the practical influence each member was able to exert in his chosen profession or field of action. Even during the days when membership lists were published, the society already operated to a large extent as an invisible and toxic force. As the Machiavellian Webb so often said, with an air of candid innocence, quote, "The work of the Fabian Society is the sum of its members' activities," end quote. At the heart of those concentric circles, ringed around and shielded from scrutiny, was the small, hard core of the Fabian leadership, which acknowledged no responsibility for the sometimes contradictory acts of individual members, even after stimulating such action. For almost 50 years, Sidney Webb remained the guiding force of the society, discreetly controlling its rather loose organizational reins and seldom letting his right hand know what the left was doing. Edward R. Pease, who replaced Sidney Olivier as General Secretary from 1890 to 1924, remained Webb's faithful watchdog, enforcing the authority and masking the often devious maneuvers of his small master. So remember, Edward R. Pease is the gentleman we talked about at the opening of tonight's stream. The society's function from its earliest years coincided perfectly with the formula of Wilhelm Liebknecht, 19th century German Marxist. Quote, to forecast a practical program for the intermediate period, to formulate and justify measures that shall be applicable at once and that will serve as aids to the new socialist birth." End quote. Grafting itself on the century-old British reform movement, the Fabian Society combined sociology with politics in an effort to propel its members into positions of national influence. Unlike their European socialist comrades, the Fabians established themselves as a private society of limited membership rather than a political party. The society was neither doctrinaire nor given to philosophical hair-splitting. All it exacted was a broad pledge of allegiance to socialist goals, leaving each member free to justify them by any logic or philosophy he preferred. So the ends justify the means. You know, this thing up here about them, the members having contradictory acts and actions, and how its members they're basically indoctrinating and training the next generation of leaders and getting them there by any means necessary. Like, say anything. It doesn't matter what you say or do to get into those positions because getting you in there is the important thing. So it doesn't matter if you lie, if you contradict what other people say in the group. It's really all about getting results. It's psychopathic, in other words, because they're just throwing morals and decency and integrity and excellence and trust out the window, and it's a case of manipulate your way to get the outcome that you want. That's my reading of it, anyway. I just lost my place with that little interruption. So he's talking about the members, and they just had to pledge to themselves to the goals, and you could justify those goals by any logic or philosophy of your preference. And he was also free to join any political party he chose, provided he utilized every possible opportunity to further the Fabian cause. So again, this is telling us and showing us how the two-party illusion and the two-party paradigm is just a sham, and the people who operate in those circles and get into those places of influence and power and control can be playing a completely different game. And to them, it doesn't matter which of the two groups is in power or which of the two groups that person themselves are in, because there are other agendas and other goals and other schemes and plans which are above and beyond and outside the scope and the range of that little two-party pantomime that's rolled out through the mass media for the plebs to consume and get invested in and argue over, right? In fact, he was encouraged to do so, for political activity was only second to education on the Fabian agenda. The practice of joining a political party for the sake of advancing Fabian programs and of placing Fabians in elective and appointive posts became known as penetration. Since the first loyalty of Fabian, so I'm just laughing because one, we've got the right-wing extremist label back in 1966, and then two, we've also got Klaus Schwab's penetration. So it's just like, what do they say? Nothing new under the sun. Since the first loyalty of Fabians was to the society, rather than to any party, their motives were sometimes suspect. Thus, Edward R. Pease was almost ejected from the Bradford Conference of 1893 when the Independent Labour Party was formed. He managed to remain and some years later was able to report that 2/3 of the Fabian Society belonged to the Independent Labour Party. After 1919, Fabians transferred their allegiance en bloc to the British Labour Party, at whose foundation other Fabians had assisted, and for all practical purposes the Independent Labour Party was no more. It remained a mere wandering voice on the far left, calling for militant action when more peaceful Fabian programs seemed in danger of bogging down and, in effect, winning liberal support for the Fabian way as being less dangerous. Fabian penetration of the Liberal Party of Great Britain, though less extensive, proved no less lethal. From 1903, Sir L.G. Chiozza Money, is that his name? Sir L.G. Chiozza Money, a member of the Fabian executive, went to Parliament as a Liberal. When Liberals came to power in the elections of 1906, 29 seats in Parliament were held by Fabians. By 1911, 42 Fabian socialists sat on the Liberal Labour benches. Eventually, their intimate knowledge of Liberal constituencies enabled Fabians to divert a number of election districts to the upcoming Labour Party and to aid the Labour Party in detaching trade union support from the Liberals. Penetration created new political alignments more profitable to the cause of socialism. What George Dangerfield called the strange death of liberal England, and that's from, and he wrote a book by that title, was hastened by the fact that the Fabian Society, on the strength of tips from its members in the Liberal Party, as well as gossip leaked from government offices, was able to release a steady barrage of printed matter politically damaging to liberalism and its leaders. The intention and the effect was to build up the Fabian-dominated Labour Party that emerged full-blown after World War I. A twin to penetration was the time-honoured Fabian practice called permeation. Much favoured by the ladies, Beatrice Webb actually believed she had invented it. So the ladies prefer permeation to penetration, just to clarify. Sorry, I know that's really just funny. Sorry. Much favoured by the ladies, Beatrice Webb actually believed she had invented it. Fabian permeation dates from an era before women could vote. Permeation meant getting the ear of important or key persons and inducing them to push through some action desired by the Fabians. It was not considered necessary that such persons be Fabians. Often, so they're manipulating people, in other words, who aren't in their group. It was not considered necessary that such persons be Fabians. Often it was preferable that they should be outsiders. The important thing was that they should act on the advice and instructions of Fabians. The rather startling appointment of Beatrice Webb to the Royal Commission on the Poor Law from 1905 to 1909 was an example of something achieved at second hand by permeation, for the unhappy official who named her to that post was neither aware of the lady's socialist bias nor her forceful nature. Permeation failed at this time to get her recommendations written into law, but the unauthorized printing of her minority report was a propaganda coup for the society. Interestingly enough, the copy that went to the printer was in Sidney's handwriting. And that looks like that last point, the footnote there is from Edward Pease, and that's page 213 of his book, History of the Fabian Society. One advantage, so the suggestion is that Sidney's writing the pamphlets and the arguments and the books and the literature that is then claimed, that is then published under the authorship name of Beatrice. One advantage of permeation, developed to a fine art by the Fabians, was that it could be practiced almost anywhere, at teas, dinners, and weekend house parties, as well as in committee and board meetings. Doubtless the same black art was known under other names to the Medes and the Persians, and was old in Cleopatra's day. It has even been seen to rear its head along the social circuit in modern Washington. The Fabian Society, however, appears to have been the first organization ever to advocate this technique openly as an instrument of political policy. A final pattern for the future, established by those two long-lived patriarchs of the Fabian Society, Sidney Webb and George Bernard Shaw, solved the problem of where socialism is going. When all is said and done, where could it go? With many of the preliminary steps accomplished and the end plainly in sight, only one road would be open to the socialists, and it would lead inexorably to the left. After the Directory, the Terror. After July, October. That is the historic pattern, and to date, it has never varied. Shaw and Webb, both hardened professionals, pointed out the way to their followers. It was no accident of old age that led them separately in 1931 and 32 to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and to full-throated capitulation. After some earlier expressions of distaste for communist violence and the iron hand of Communist Party discipline, they could no longer restrain themselves from making public professions of their allegiance. Perhaps they had always known what the journey's end must be. Perhaps, in their secret hearts, they had been there all the time. At the turn of the century, Joseph Fels, a soap magnate from Philadelphia and an early member of the Fabian Society, which is listed as a Fabian in Fabian News of March 1905. His name, he was listed as a Fabian in 1905, had in 1907 loaned money to Russian revolutionaries at the time when Lenin quarreled with the majority of Russia's Social Democrats and formed the Bolshevik wing of the party. In those struggling early days, there had seemed to the Fabians to be no enemies on the left, and perhaps it has remained so. Weighted with years and honours, the Webbs and George Bernard Shaw travelled royally to Moscow to announce their full support for the Soviet system of rationalised barbarism. Shaw, by then the Dean of English Letters, told Stalin that the words, "the inevitability of gradualness," should be engraved on Lenin's tomb. Webb, now Baron Passfield, exchanged ideas on colonial policy with Stalin, who had launched his own public career with a study of subject nationalities. In 1929 to 1930, Webb had served on Britain's Secretary of State for the Dominions and Colonies, and in 1930 to 31 as Secretary of State for the colonies. Among the poisoned fruits of the Webb sojourn in the socialist fatherland was a 2-volume work entitled Soviet Socialism, A New Civilization? The question mark was dropped in later editions. Even before publication, portions of the manuscript placed in the right hands helped to spark a movement leading to United States recognition of the Soviet Union in 1933. The Webbs had known Maxim Litvinov, the Soviet foreign minister, and his British-born wife, the former Ivy Lowe, during that couple's years of exile in London. Like the character in Stendhal's historical novel who rode through the Battle of Waterloo without being aware of it, the Webbs were present at a wholesale slaughter and did not see or choose to see it. Their visit to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in 1932 coincided, well, maybe they did not see it, or they chose not to see it, or they saw it and approved and just didn't have a problem with it and didn't comment on it. It could be that as well. I'm just going to have a sip. Where were we? Their visit to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics coincided with the huge man-made famine that swept the Ukraine and Crimea, where a minimum of 2 to 3 million persons was deliberately starved to death in order to hasten the Soviet program of farm confiscations. Such horrors were handily omitted from the Webb's encyclopedic volumes, whose publication was withheld until after the 1935 British elections. Their index refers to famine alleged. The actual sources of this book were revealed some years later in testimony given to the Internal Security Subcommittee of the United States Senate Committee on the Judiciary, appearing before that body on April the 7th, 1952. Colonel I.M. Bogolubov, a former Soviet Army officer who had been attached from 1930 to 1936 to the Soviet Foreign Office, recalled his dealings with the Webbs. He stated bluntly that the entire text of the Webbs book had been prepared in the Soviet Foreign Office. Material for the chapter on Soviet prison camps, stressing the humane methods employed in those factories of death and minimizing the vast scale of their operations, was specially compiled by the secret police and also delivered through the Foreign Office to the learned couple. The colonel happened to know these things because, as he explained with some amusement, he had done most of the ghostwriting himself in the line of duty. Colonel Bogolubov added that after fleeing to the West, he read the Webbs book with much interest and found they had used his prepared material almost verbatim. Just a few changes for the English text, just a little bit criticizing, he remarked ironically, which is almost but not quite the last word on Fabian research. For some reason, their gyrations did not estrange the Webbs from the Fabian Society or vice versa. When Sidney died in 1947, a few years after Beatrice, he left their joint estate of £30,000 to the Fabian Society and the London School of Economics. For services rendered, a grateful Labour government interred the ashes of Sidney and Beatrice Webb, who had been practicing atheists most of their lives, in the hallowed precincts of Westminster Abbey. Concerning the final disposition of Beatrice, who once wrote that, quote, "the character of Jesus has never appealed to me," end quote, Shaw commented on a postcard to her niece, Barbara Drake, quote, "B must be sizzling to hear the name Jesus spoken over her," end quote. Shaw, and there's a footnote which says, in a letter dated January the 14th, 1948, and written just a few years before his death to Miss Fanny Holtzman, a New York attorney, Shaw stated, "My dear Fanny, I am not a Cobdenite liberal, but the very opposite, a communist, though not a member of the so-called Communist Party." And that's from the Washington Post in 1948. Shaw, carrying his defiance of everything holy into the hereafter, ordered his ashes to be scattered in the garden of his home at Ayotte, St. Lawrence, quote, "to make the soil of England more fertile for the growth of socialism." At the Beatrice Webb House in Surrey, used today for Fabian summer schools and weekend conferences, there is a rather grotesque stained glass window ordered by Shaw in 1910. It depicts himself and Webb smashing the world with working men's hammers. Among the Fabians kneeling below in attitudes of mock adoration is the novelist H.G. Wells, thumbing his nose irreverently, but still close to the old gang. On a streamer overhead is the legend, "Remold it nearer to the heart's desire." That much-quoted line comes, of course, from a quatrain in Edward Fitzgerald's translation of Omar Khayyam. Quote, "Dear love, couldst thou and I with fate conspire to grasp this sorry scheme of things entire, would we not shatter it to bits and then remold it nearer to the heart's desire?" To an outsider, those verses might seem no more than a quaintly Victorian literary relic, but to the Fabians, they are still a literal statement of destructive intent. And the next chapter is chapter 4, A Chosen Instrument. But how about that? Fantastic chapter. I really love that. I like that she talked to us about the Fabian window. And we looked at that on Tuesday. We found a good image and we had a nice close-up view of that. I'm just wondering if we can find. Let's see if I can open this in a new tab. I want to find which one is that's Wells. I'm just going to get this up and show you H.G. Wells. This is H.G. Wells. He's the guy who was thumbing his nose, which I think back in the day was some kind of insult. I don't know. It reminds me of the Leonardo DiCaprio Romeo and Juliet, where he's like, "Do you bite your thumb at me, sir?" And that's a big insult, and he gets upset because he bit his thumb. So I think this here is H.G. Wells thumbing his nose irreverently. But it did say that this lot were always teasing and arguing and debating and discussing and giving each other grief and winding each other up and insulting each other and this sort of thing. But we also have here, and just for anyone who didn't see this on Tuesday, this version is not quite as high res as the last one we looked at. It's on here anyway, where it says Minority Report is there. Minority Report on the Poor Law. So, what did you think about that little chapter? Anything stand out to you? Quite a lot stood out to me. They're penetrating cabinets, they're grooming and wooing and training and mind controlling future leaders. They're operating a sort of secret society model of rings within rings within rings. They're manipulating people. They've got an ends justify the means. They don't care if they have to lie. They've got a psychopathic way of doing things. That's kind of what I took away from that. Gonna have another sip. So in the quotes, LJ says, "Why does not surprise me about Tony Blair, Frank?" Yeah. CESP says that you can't believe you've not seen the film Prestige. Oh, you got to watch it twice, at least. Yeah, Gwen says Tony Blair unveiled the Fabian window when it was restored to LSE. Yep, that's true. There's pictures of him doing that. I won't pull one up to show you because he's one of the most evil-looking goblins I've ever seen in my life. Ledger domain, says Heidi. Ledger equals lightness of main. Oh, sorry. Ledger equals lightness. Main equals hand. Fingersmith, pickpocket, ledger domain, lightness of hand. Oh, thank you. That's a really good breakdown of what it means. CESP, getting the main players hooked on drugs is even better for controlling them. Ukraine has had it rough. Yeah, that reminds me. One sec. On the topic of Ukraine has it rough, check this out. I got this one a while ago. This is the taboo genocide, the Holodomor of 1933. And check out the size of this book. It is an absolute, and the writing is tiny as well. But this is what that is about. The Holodomor 1933 and the extermination of Ukraine. It says on the front, the triad, FDR, Stalin, and Hitler, a strategy for war and peace and the New World Order. The never-before-told story of the Anglo-American Consortium and the terror famine of 1933 in the Soviet Union. I haven't read it. And it doesn't even have loads of footnotes and references and stuff at the end. It literally is just text back to back right up to the last page. That's 998 pages. So, yeah, if you want to learn more about how bad the Ukrainians had it, that is probably a good one to grab. This is by a guy called Chris Dietrich, writer and journalist. And this is, if you can believe it, Volume 2. I haven't been able to find Volume 1 anywhere, but so I'm not sure if that's a misprint or a typo or something. But yeah, have a look at that. I just grabbed it on Amazon. It's not a hard one to find, and it wasn't overly expensive or anything. Needless to say that Ukraine is a hot spot for sure. Definitely, they did have it rough. Some reason, the powers that shouldn't be have a fascination and obsession with that area and that part of the world. And that's still going on, isn't it? Elizabeth's here. Good evening. She says she's really late and she'll catch up later. I hope you enjoy the catch up. We are, an hour and a half into this now. Celine Lyon says, oh, I got your name right first time. Boom. How about that? Celine Lyon. It really is quite amazing how sick these individuals are. They're clearly mentally and spiritually ill. Yeah, mentally and spiritually ill. Exactly. And spiritually, empty, like we learned in the introductory chapter. They had this emptiness inside them because they'd been convinced that there was no spirit and no soul, no connection with any kind of creator or angels, which means if you're not aware of and nurturing that sort of alignment with the good and the source of order and perfection and beauty and love, whether that be the Christian God or some other God, God or gods, if you're not trying to align yourself with that higher dimensional source of love and light and beauty, then you're going to be ripe for manipulation from the other side of things in the spiritual realm, right? And you're going to end up being kind of psychopathic and genocidal and a bit of a social, what's the word? Psychopathic, and what's the other one? Sociopathic in your dealings with people and totally willing to manipulate and pull strings and lie and contradict yourself and be part of an organization where people just contradict themselves all the time. And there's no coherent effort or sense of ethics or purpose or mission or values, right? So, yeah, it kind of follows. So I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Heidi says that's why most people can't believe it. Most people literally cannot conceive of the horror in some people's hearts. Yeah, a lot of people are like, well, they would never do that. No. You would never do that because you're not a psycho. because you're not a maniac. You haven't been traumatized and abused, and you haven't had like generational abuse and trauma in your lineage and maybe in your childhood that's turned you into a secondary psychopath. You haven't had that, right? But some other people have. So you should never assume that just because you are a certain way or value a certain thing or wouldn't do a certain thing that applies to all humans everywhere. It just definitely does not work like that. Not at all, unfortunately. Or maybe fortunately, because if we were all the same, it would be kind of boring as well, wouldn't it? I'm just going to scratch my nose quickly. There you go. You got to have another look at my dancing eyebrows. Fliffle Flaffle, hello again. Most of them are theosophists. Yeah. So I hope you were here earlier. I recommended for the recommendation of James Lindsay's podcast on theosophy in the United Nations. But good to have you back, Fliffle Flaffle. I haven't seen you for a while, in the chat at least. So nice to know you're still out there. And thanks for commenting. Yeah, most of them are theosophists, and theosophy is the underlying, undergirding religion / philosophy / something of the UN, and that is, was it Alice Bailey? Was it Alice Bailey? She set up Lucifer Publishing Company, which became Lucius Publishing. And they still, you can go onto the UN website and they're still connected with Lucius Publishing and sharing documents and bigging up the work and the publications. Okay. I reckon it's probably about time to crack on with another chapter. Sorry, I just got distracted there because Adam has found a slightly clearer image of the Fabian window. I hope you could share that in the chat. I'm not sure if you can share links in the chat. I might have disabled that somehow accidentally. And I can't really on the fly right now go and figure out how to allow you to do that. Maybe you could add it as a comment under the video. Otherwise, I'm not quite sure. Or you could email it to me and then I could use that in future broadcasts. That might be the best way, Adam, if you don't mind sharing your email address with me. All right. So that was the Dangerous Fabians. And that was a good chapter. And I'm enjoying reading. I'm enjoying reading this because it's written critically with some sort of dark humor, rather than Raymond Fosdick's was a very sort of dry account. It was quite corporate in a way, factual names, and then this happened, and then this happened, and they did that. Whereas because Rolls L. Martin is an outsider looking in and writing with a critical eye, and not like I've said, it's important to hear them in their own words, but I'm just enjoying reading that outside view written in a critical way, because you get that little bit of like sarcasm coming through and her humor coming through as well when she's pointing out the hypocrisy and the craziness and the stupidity of the things that these people said versus what they did, and so I'm quite enjoying this so far. So, this is chapter 4, and it's called A Chosen Instrument. The demonic, right on cue, first sentence, what we were just saying. The demonic spirits of the Fabian Society, Shaw and Webb, lived long enough to see a number of their destructive hopes fulfilled. Progress of their brainchild in the 20th century far outstripped its fin de siècle. Oh, I don't know about that. I've never seen that phrase before. Can you see that? Fin de siècle, promise. So if anyone knows what that means or can look it up, please whack it in the chat. That'd be good too. Still guarded in its movements and as nearly invisible as possible, the society became the directing force of socialism, not only in Britain, but throughout the empire it schemed to dissolve. Leading Fabians had been making world tours since 1898, and since that time, colonial units of the society had multiplied and prospered. When the colonial administrators departed, native Fabians educated at the London School of Economics were ready and all too willing to take a hand in shaping socialist-oriented Commonwealth governments. In Britain, the influence of the society had grown steadily, if imperceptibly, until it dominated a major political party, a far cry from its small beginnings. Even in its fledgling years, however, the society had been able to obtain cooperation whenever required from all domestic socialist factions, because individual Fabians were active in each of these splinter groups. At one time or another, Fabian projects and candidates had received support from the radical clubs, the Progressives, the Cooperative Union, the National Reform League, the Social Democratic Federation, the Independent Labour Party, and other left-wing bodies. By refusing to identify itself with any of them, the Fabian Society survived them all and went on to larger things. An exception to this rule was eventually made in the case of the Labour Party, founded and directed throughout its history by top echelon Fabians. Today, members of the Fabian Society must be eligible for membership in the Labour Party, though the reverse is not the case. As Fabians gradually moved into positions of power with the support of British Labour, they have utilised that power for the advancement of socialism abroad as well as at home. It is not surprising that their first decisive action in foreign affairs was undertaken for the benefit of their brothers under the skin in Moscow. The sweeping threat by British trade unions to down tools in 1920 was instigated by an arch-Fabian, Arthur Henderson. This threat effectively ended British military intervention in Russia and enabled the Bolsheviks to capture large stores of British-made munitions, a decisive factor in the survival of Bolshevik armed rule, as Joseph Stalin suggested in an interview with George Bernard Shaw and the Liberal Party leader Lord Lothian, later ambassador to Washington. The footnote there is Hesketh Pearson, and that's a book called Bernard Shaw from 1961. Lord Lothian, that name has popped up, I think, if I remember correctly, in the Lord Milner's Second War books, and maybe the Hidden History books as well, about the British being responsible for World War I kicking off. Throughout the 1920s, Fabian instructed labour groups and Fabian members of Parliament pressed for renewal of trade relations by Great Britain and other nations with Soviet Russia. Their pretext was that such trade would provide more employment for British workers and more votes for the Labour Party, though it is hard to see how revived commerce between the Soviet Union and Weimar Germany could have aided the British working man. What the Fabians aimed at was a three-cornered interchange between themselves, their Social Democrat confreres in Germany, and the Soviet Socialist republics, all leading, as Shaw remarked, to socialist control of trade at the consular level. And Heidi's jumped in and said, fin de siècle means end of century in French. And I'm definitely butchering that pronunciation, so thank you for that. End of century promise. Why not just say end of century then? She's just showing off with French phrases. I'm actually finding her writing harder to read than Fosdick in the Rockefeller Foundation. Just the rhythm of her sentences and the prose. I'm struggling to read it in a flowing way that maybe I just haven't got into it yet. I'll probably pick it up. We got about another 420 pages to go. So whereabouts were we? Arthur Henderson. Yeah, so we'll go from there. Arthur Henderson, long a member of the Fabian executive, was the foreign minister who in 1929 engineered British diplomatic recognition of Bolshevik Russia and paved the way for similar recognition by the United States in a period when the Soviets' internal economy and external prestige were perilously low. Little was said or even hinted as to just how far such cooperation advanced the various communist five-year plans and permitted the Soviet Union, with its technique of bloodbaths, intrigue, sedition, and guerrilla warfare, to acquire the imperial status abandoned after World War II by England. It is noteworthy that Fabian publicists today no longer refer to Great Britain, but simply to Britain. So they're like working from within to bring down the British Empire, it sounds like, and they're wanting to big up the Soviets. The once imperial island, which no foreign force for 1,000 years could violate, finally succumbed to Fabian guile. What Philip's Spain, Napoleon's France, and Kaiser and Hitler's Germany had all failed to achieve, a small band of homegrown socialists peacefully accomplished. How Fabians performed this feat in approximately 3/4 of a century is a mystery that the society would now prefer to dismiss as fiction. A glance at the record, however, confirms the facts and provides a neat object lesson for other nations where allegedly gentle and humane socialists aspire to power. From the beginning, the destructive nature of Fabian socialism was never made sufficiently clear to the British public. The good manners of the Fabians tended to veil their revolutionary purpose and render it improbable to all but the initiate. To gain popular sympathy, the society concealed its will to power behind a series of apparently benign social welfare programs and preached the brotherhood of man for the attainment of purely material ends. Whenever possible, its members attached themselves to existing reform movements, which in the long run gained prominence and preferment for Fabian leaders. In every decade of the 20th century, Fabians have claimed the credit for every liberal reform. Thus, gradual and penetrating socialism came to be accepted as more reformism, and its practitioners escaped the censure directed at socialists of the catastrophic school. As George Bernard Shaw announced in 1948, the Fabian Society was, quote, still alive and doing its work, which is to rescue socialism and communism from the barricades. One no longer even needed to read Marx and Engels in order to advance their programs. Cunningly, Fabian socialism represented itself as, quote, a constitutional movement in which the most respected citizens and families may enlist, without forfeiting the least scrap of their social or spiritual standing. And the footnote there, that's from, it says, all the names which follow are listed by official Fabian historians, Edward R. Pease and Margaret Cole, or recur frequently in the pages of the official Fabian publications, Fabian News, and the Fabian Annual Reports. To emphasize the Society's regard for family ties, a single membership sufficed for both husband and wife. Their children, instructed in Fabian nurseries for adolescents, grew up into revolution without ever realizing there was any other way. In the course of nearly 4 generations, some highly respected names in modern British letters and learning have been connected with the Fabian Society, either as dues-paying members or willing collaborators. Oh, sorry, I read the wrong footnote for the last bit. The footnote I previously read is talking about these collaborators and saying that all the names of the collaborators come from either the official Fabian historians or the official Fabian publications. In the field of history, there were such gifted individuals as G.M. Trevelyan, Philippa Guadala, Arnold Toynbee, remember him? He was funded by the Rockefellers, and G.M. Trevelyan. I think I might have one of his books. One sec. Let me check. Excuse me a moment. I'll be right back. Yeah, this is one that I grabbed because it's old. That's literally the reason that I grabbed it. But that Trevelyan name just tickled my memory. So this is Illustrated History of England. Look at that. It's actually got a 5-pointed flower or plant of some kind on there, which with one point pointing downwards, but I'm sure that's just a coincidence. Don't read too much into it. But this is the Illustrated History of Britain by G.M. Trevelyan, who I've now found out is a Fabian socialist, and so who knows whether or not we can rely on this. But this was, let's see, this is 1956. Has some pictures in here. But I thought, books being older nowadays tend to have better information in. So I wanted to grab it because it was in a secondhand bookshop and it has quite a lot of illustrations. But anyway, now I know that this gentleman, G.M. Trevelyan, is a Fabian socialist. And so we'll probably have a certain spin on the way he presents the history of Britain. The history of England, sorry. So he just calls it England. And then, of course, we got Arnold Toynbee. Oh, that's too far. Arnold Toynbee, who was named in the Raymond Fosdick book as being Rockefeller funded. Okay. Philosopher statesman Lord Haldane also belonged to the society, according to a Fabian News obituary. There was R.H. Tawney, economist, social historian, and longtime member of the Fabian executive, known for his personal piety, devotion to the Virgin Mary, and bitter anti-capitalist bias. A whole series of Fabians held membership in the Royal Economic Society, which George Bernard Shaw and a few fellow social democrats had helped to launch many years before, and contributed regularly to its journal, edited for a time by John Maynard Keynes. So remember, John Maynard Keynes is the man who came up with Keynesian economics, which is the default version of economics that you get if you study an A-level or a university course here in the UK. And Nigel Watson talks about this on his channel. There's a whole competing school of economics called Austrian economics, which is never taught in universities and in the mainstream education systems here for a very good reason. That reason being that it works and it doesn't allow the total enslavement of the population via fiat currency, fractional reserve lending, and lending at an interest, and the creation of money out of nothing, controlled by private interests. But don't quote me on that. I don't really know what I'm talking about when it comes to economics. But just interesting that John Maynard Keynes pops up here and edited the journal. So, in science, the society claimed Sir Julian Huxley. It just gets better. Julian Huxley, he was the founder of UNESCO. He was the first chairman or something, whatever it is called, of UNESCO. He has written a book called UNESCO, Its Purpose and Philosophy. So talking about the theosophical religion, cult religion that is at the root and behind the UN, as detailed in the podcast we referenced at the beginning of this episode. You've also got Sir Julian Huxley, who was the brother of Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World, the grandson of T.H. Huxley, who was Darwin's bulldog, and pushed the Darwinian evolutionary worldview very enthusiastically, let's say. So these names, these families, very much close, very, very much interlinked, overlapping, and circles within circles, keeping it in the family. No surprise to see Julian Huxley's name there. University tutors and professors were legion, among them such venerated figures as A.D. Lindsay, the Master of Balliol, and Sidney Ball, Don of St. John's, Oxford, until his death in 1918, and founder of the Oxford Social Club that sponsored Fabian lecturers. Military opinion was represented by the late Brigadier General C.B. Thompson and Captain B.H. Liddell Hart, military correspondent for the Times and proponent of the theory of defensive warfare, who in recent years has addressed official Fabian Society gatherings. Fabian poets include Maurice Hewlett and Rupert Brooke, the Cambridge undergraduate who died in military service during World War I. Among editors holding membership in the society were Harold Cox MP of the Edinburgh Review, A.J. Orage of the New Age, and S.K. Ratcliffe of the New Statesman, who also served as London representative of the New Republic. The publishing fraternity was represented by Raymond Unwin of the firm of Allen and Unwin, whose books were reprinted in America by Macmillan. Leonard Woolf, husband of the well-known writer Virginia Woolf, and himself the author of a Fabian document, International Government, which was an early blueprint for the League of Nations, and Victor Gallant's of Left Book Club notoriety, who also published the Fabian News. I got to do a little star here because I would like to look for this book, International Government. I'll put a little tab on this one as well to remind me. Actually, I'm just going to leave a card in there to come back and remind me to look up that book, International Government. Never heard of that one. So many successful writers and publicists have been aligned with the Fabian Society that an innocent observer might easily have mistaken it for a kind of log-rolling literary society. Among them were Arnold Bennett, H.G. Wells, Rebecca West, John Galsworthy, Granville Barker, Harold Nicholson, Sir John Irvine, Constance Garnett. Constance Garnett. That name rings a bell. So she was a translator of Tolstoy and other pre-revolutionary Russian novelists. Oh yeah, the reason I know her name is because I was looking up what is the best translation to get of Dostoevsky. I was interested in reading Dostoevsky back when I was going through my Jordan B. Peterson phase. And Constance Garnett is apparently one of the best translators of Russian literature, which is exactly what it says here. Francis Hackett, Jerome K. Jerome, Robert Dell, E.M. Forster. I read some E.M. Forster at university on my degree. J.B. Priestley, J.C. Squire, Desmond McCarthy, Naomi Mitchison, and a host of others. They have ranged from the frankly Marxist John Strachey to the neo-Catholic Barbara Ward, propagandist for African nationalism. Even Monsignor Ronald Knox confessed to having joined the Oxford Fabian Society, and G.K. Chesterton was once a Fabian, but both withdrew from the movement prior to their conversion to the Catholic faith. Good on them. As an authority on the subject has remarked, quote, Fabians appeared in so many desirable liberal and cultural connections that they could scarcely be believed to be subversive of private property or of liberty, end quote. And that quote comes from M.P. McCarran in a book, Fabianism in the Political Life of Britain. That's from 1954. The London School of Economics, aided by grants from the Rockefeller Foundation, was growing to world renown as, quote, the empire on which the concrete never sets. What? The empire on which the concrete never sets. Oh, the concrete never sets. Yeah, that's a pretty good one, actually. Scant attention was paid to the fact that its lecturers in economics and the so-called political and social sciences were almost invariably Fabian socialists or their bedfellows. Many persons who disagreed with its politics relished the good style and literary flair of the New Statesman, a weekly journal of opinion founded by the Webbs in 1913, financed, edited, and written largely by Fabians though nominally independent of the society. In their mannerly, welfare-bent, cultivated, and studious fashion, Fabian socialists were progressively undermining the foundations of the British Empire and the age-old liberties of Englishmen, as a more stridently revolutionary movement could hardly have succeeded in doing. Quote, as much freedom as possible, consistent with public control of the means of production, end quote, became their slogan. A formula that denies liberty itself as a basic human right and begs the question as to how much of it is possible under state control of private initiative. Only Shaw, in his old age, warned that a great deal more regulation than most people anticipated, including stern restriction of trade union activity, would be inevitable in the elite-ruled socialist state. But his realistic view of the promised land was dismissed as just another tired Shavian paradox. While the Fabian Society consists chiefly of middle-class intellectuals, it has never been intolerant of affluence or noble birth if they furthered the Fabian cause. Peers like Lord Parmore and Lord Henry Bentinck, offshoot of a famous liberal family, graced the membership lists of the society even before a Labour Party government created its own non-hereditary peerage. One of the earliest aristocratic converts to socialism had been the Countess of Warwick, young, beautiful, and a friend of King Edward VII. The Countess was so much impressed by what her newfound friends were doing to help the poor that she donated her country house, Eastern Lodge, to the Fabians for a perpetual weekend haven and conference centre. Earlier still, Charlotte Payne Townsend, an Anglo-Irish convert to socialism known as the Millionairess, had been induced by Beatrice Webb to contribute £1,000 to the London School of Economics. As a reward, Beatrice Webb introduced her to the indigent Fabian George Bernard Shaw, whose poverty was soon abolished by marriage to Charlotte Payne Townsend. So I'm reading that as George Bernard Shaw's poverty was soon abolished by marriage to Charlotte Payne Townsend. So that'll be the third man who's been lifted out of poverty and lifted out of needing to work or earn or provide that's involved in this. Right? We had Pease. Edward Pease was the first, and then Sidney Webb, same thing with him, and now George Bernard Shaw. So it sounds like they're very good at securing donations and getting other people's money and doing and getting their work done with other people's money, and also the men don't like working. That's what I'm kind of getting here. Before wedding her in a civil ceremony, Shaw insisted on extracting a marriage settlement from his Charlotte, a somewhat cold-blooded procedure, but a clear indication of how highly prized by Fabians was personal solvency. Shaw later earned substantial sums from his propagandizing plays and essays, but fortunately for him and many another Fabian, royalties and dowries were never a form of wealth marked for nationalization by the society. Fancy that. Fancy that. It was the wily Shaw who also perceived the possibility of utilizing the poor to finance the political advancement of socialists. As early as 1893, he had been the first to propose using trade union funds to elect socialists to Parliament, a scheme whose vast potential was not fully apparent in an era when only a small segment of British labour was organised. As the trade unions grew in numbers and wealth under Fabian-tutored leaders, the method suggested by Shaw would propel Fabian socialists into positions of national control. Much slow, painstaking political and educational work by Fabians, culminating in a brand new alignment of political parties in Great Britain, was necessary to bring these hopes to fruition. When Fabian Essays was published in 1889, only a little over 10% of Great Britain's industrial workers belonged to trade unions. It was understandable, though not quite pardonable, that the essays should have failed to include any mention whatever of the subject. This omission was hastily repaired with the publication in 1894 of a history of trades unionism by the Webbs, who saw the light in ample time to take advantage of it. As a practical step towards political power, the Labour Representation Committee was formed at Sidney Webb's suggestion in 1899. Despite its resounding title, that committee was at first no more than a representative collection of socialist splinter groups, convoked to find ways and means of obtaining parliamentary seats for socialists in the name of Labour. Discreetly, the Fabian Society sent only one delegate, the mole-like Edward R. Pease, a well-disciplined committee man. Pease avoided controversy and, in a shadowy way, exerted much influence on organisation through the years. The society, as such, remained in the background. One reason why the Fabian Society preferred to avoid the limelight was in order to avert any direct challenge to its leadership role in the socialist movement. Another was the harsh fact that some Labour men, then as now, regarded the society as being almost too high-toned for comfort. For a good many years, its sole working-class member was a London house painter, W. L. Phillips, author of Fabian Tract No. 1, Why Are the Many Poor? As late as 1923, there was not one proletarian on the Fabian executive, and even today there are still divisional Labour Party leaders and agents in Great Britain to whom the term Fabian merely implies that snob society. Anonymity in the Labour Representation Committee involved no real sacrifice for the society, because individual Fabians wearing other hats were on hand to defend its interests. Keir Hardie was there as head of the Independent Labour Party. That's an interesting, we got another Keir on the scene, Keir Hardie. At that early date, the leading socialist political party in Great Britain, Hardie was a member of the Fabian Society, though some called him undisciplined. Similarly, Ramsay MacDonald, who was chairman of the committee and also headed the New Labour Party, belonged for some years to the society. Arthur Henderson, a former Wesleyan minister and admitted Fabian from 1912, was permanent treasurer of the committee as well as MacDonald's chief personal aide. Originally, the British Labour Party, which grew out of this committee, was just another socialist splinter group. It was a strange masquerade, which deceived no one except the public, but in the end it served its purpose, namely to decoy organised labour into the Fabian socialist trap. Results were not immediately apparent, and patience was recommended. Though trade unions were urged to affiliate with the committee and the Independent Labour Party worked to infiltrate the trade unions, the first acceptance did not come until 1903 from the Gas Workers' Union. Fabian historians complain that the initial fee for union affiliation was fixed much too low, provoking some difficulties when the committee found itself obliged to raise the tariff. Socialists were finding that it cost more money to win elections than they had supposed. The rather modest success of this committee in gaining seats for socialists in the parliamentary elections of 1906 and 1911 justified its existence. During those years, the Labour group in Parliament operated chiefly as a pressure bloc within the Liberal Party, and due to its relative weakness, it was neither disliked nor feared. As yet, no one except its Fabian mentors could be sure whether the little Labour Party was an advanced guard of socialism or a mere appendage of liberalism. It was the outbreak of war in 1914 that offered Fabian socialism its big opportunity to organise a mass Labour Party on the home front, while the flower of Old England was dying on the first traditional thin red battle lines. Many years before, Karl Marx had predicted that a general European war would give socialists an opening to capture power. Let's just read that again. Many years before, Karl Marx, so this is before 1914, so this is before World War I. Karl Marx predicted that a general European war would give socialists an opening to capture power. That's quite an interesting prediction, isn't it? That proved to be the case in Russia, and to a more limited extent in other parts of Europe. In England, the country where the capitalism of our era was born and originally demonstrated its dynamic force, the advance of socialism was more deliberate. Not one, but 2 world wars were needed to reduce that island fortress. Nevertheless, the Fabian tortoise, as if guided by Marxian precepts, moved during World War I to strike its first major blow. The men most responsible for inciting it were Sidney Webb and Arthur Henderson, who combined their treacherous efforts in a period of political truce to form a new style Labour Party quite unlike the old semi-pressure group. On August 6, 1914, the War Emergency Workers' Committee was born and proved to be the most influential single event in the creation of the revised Labour Party. The Emergency Committee's chairman, until he joined the government, was Arthur Henderson, and its secretary was J.S. Middleton, Assistant Secretary of the Labour Party. Both were members and tools of the Fabian Society. While Sidney Webb held no official position on the War Emergency Workers' Committee, his skill in drafting statements and bringing unlikely groups together under one roof assured him a leading role. Looking more than ever like a tintype of Napoleon III, the aging but agile Sidney was cast for the role which suited him best, that of a mastermind behind the scenes, exerting influence without responsibility, the grey eminence of a socialist mass party to be manipulated in Labour's name. Within a week after the wartime committee was set up, Webb had prepared and issued Fabian Tract No. 176, The War and the Workers, for distribution throughout the country. This tract urged branches of all participating groups to set up local emergency committees, presumably to defend the wartime and post-war living standards of labour and to help keep the working force on the production lines. It is noteworthy that a series of conferences on restoring trade union conditions after the war was held in Fabian Hall, and the audiences heard Beatrice Webb and other Fabian socialists reject the Whiteley Council system of capital labour government cooperation. The War Emergency Workers' Committee, in effect, delivered organised British labour into socialist hands. It embraced the Trades Union Congress and the General Federation of Trades Unions, the powerful miners, railwaymen and transport workers unions, the cooperative movement and wholesale society, the Women's Labour League and Cooperative Guild, the London Trade Council, the National Union of Teachers, in addition to the Labour Party and the Socialist Societies. Joint local committees of all these organisations would provide the base for a new national party to include, quote, workers of hand and brain, end quote. Not even the urgencies of wartime can explain why the cabinet of Lloyd George was so incautious as to present the Labour Party and the Fabian Society with virtually unlimited access to future working class votes. Obviously, both groups were considered innocuous, a public impression the party and the society had taken pains to foster. As far as the war government was concerned, the Emergency Committee proved quite useful in the summer of 1915 when the penalty clause of the Munitions of War Act was found inapplicable to a large-scale work stoppage. Since Lloyd George could not jail 200,000 striking Welsh coal miners, whose output was badly needed, he welcomed the committee's diplomatic intervention. In December 1915, Sidney Webb was named the Fabian Society's official representative on the Labour Party executive, and his collaboration with Arthur Henderson became still closer. By war's end, the Labour Party had a skeleton network of local units reaching from the Shetlands to Land's End. It also boasted a new constitution and an overall programme, both the work of Fabians. The circumstances that produced the Labour Party's constitution should be remembered because they illustrate so plainly the emotional effect of the Russian Revolution on British Fabians. The 1917 revolution was hailed as a victory by socialists of every stripe throughout the world, even though it cost Allied lives by releasing a number of German army divisions for service on the Western Front. In his enthusiasm, Arthur Henderson asked permission for British Labour representatives to visit Sweden along with other Allied socialists and confer with the Russian revolutionaries. When the War Cabinet bluntly refused such facilities, Henderson was so outraged that he sat down and, with Sidney Webb's help, wrote the new constitution for the British Labour Party. Promptly adopted in February 1918, it established the Labour Party as a federation of affiliated bodies to include the trade unions, the Royal Arsenal Cooperative Society, the Socialist Societies, and local Labour Party units. Only delegates of these constituent groups were entitled to sit on the party executive or vote at its congresses, a provision that forever excluded the mere Labour Party sympathiser and independent voter from any voice or influence in party affairs. At the same time, its Fabian architects cleverly managed to identify the Labour Party with Labour as such, so that anyone opposed to its socialist programme appeared by inference to be a foe of the working man. It is interesting to note that a similar trick of language was exploited at a later date by the authors of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, who contrived to equate the Democratic Party in the United States with the idea of democracy, thereby implying that all opponents of Roosevelt's policies were enemies of democracy itself, a prime example of false logic purveyed through mass suggestion. That is a huge problem in this day and age. False logic purveyed through mass suggestion. But I really like that point there that she makes about labour, because labour, the working man, the blue collars, the average Jane and Joes trying to make ends meet, when actually this has been taken over by men who don't want to work and just want to live off fortunes and wealth that's been handed down and left and bequeathed in wills and that sort of thing. The new Labour Party constitution accomplished the long-hoped-for Fabian fusion of trade unionists who furnished the votes and the money, and socialists who dictated the policy. It was an unnatural creation resembling the two-faced pagan god Janus, with, in this case, one face looking to labour for power and the other looking to socialism for heaven on earth. To bind labour more effectively to socialism, Sidney Webb had organised his first tutorial class in 1916 at the London School of Economics. There, he lectured on Fabian economics and doctrineless socialism to Britain's future trade union leaders, as GDH Cole and Harold Lasky did after him. That name Harold Lasky really stands out to me, but I'm not sure why. This so-called adult education movement, designed to bring the socialist-oriented university professor and the labour movement together, had been initiated at Oxford in 1906 under the sponsorship of the Workers' Educational Association, sometimes described as the fruit of Edwardian liberalism. It was supported from the start by such eminent Fabian socialist dons as A.D. Lindsay, R.H. Tawney, and Sidney Ball. And that's from, the reference for that is Learning and Living, which is a 1961 book, a study in the history of the English adult education movement. Fabian Society locals at Oxford and Cambridge sent their most promising young men and women to teach at Workers' Educational Association evening courses in nearby working class centres. It was while teaching at such a school that Lord Pakenham, the Catholic Fabian, met his future bride and a niece of Lord Curzon. Lord Curzon also rings a bell. A lot of these names I've heard before in other places, so I got to flesh this out and really get... There's a list of names at the back of this book, and there must be 300 or 400 names in there. Through the adult school and the Labour Church, socialist intellectuals were able in a single generation to shape the minds and politics of those who were to bring the trade unions into the Labour Party. Such men as Ernest Bevin, who headed the Transport and General Workers' Union, representing 4 million electoral votes, and Emmanuel Shinwell, who succeeded Ramsay MacDonald as the idol of the radical Clydesiders, had known only 4 or 5 years of grammar school education. While Shinwell claimed to have educated himself through reading at public libraries, Bevin supplemented his formal schooling, or the lack of it, by attending the Fabian-backed adult school classes of Bristol Town Council. In after years, as Britain's foreign minister, Bevin paid tribute to the adult school movement and especially to his teacher, H.B. Lees-Smith, a Fabian socialist Labour theoretician who later served in the MacDonald government of 1929 and for a time during World War II was acting leader of the Parliamentary Labour Party. A good many Labour MPs of 1945 owed their university education to the Workers' Educational Association and its offshoots. And that the quote, the reference for that last bit is footnote 9, which is Margaret Cole, her book, The Story of Fabian Socialism. That's 1961 publication. Fabians estimated that only 5% of the working class was worthy of being groomed for leadership, but every member of their own hand-picked society was regarded as a potential leader in his chosen field. After 1918, Fabians wishing to enter politics would do so through the Labour Party. At the same time, the society continued to disclaim responsibility for the political views or activities of its members, just as it also disclaimed responsibility for the tracts published under its imprint. Asserting that the world movement towards socialism was above and beyond mere individual or party bias, this delicate distinction puzzled and sometimes irritated the more forthright trade union men. The revolutionary programme of the reborn Labour Party, which in essence has not changed to this day, was primarily the work of one Fabian, the durable Sidney Webb. It's a great way to be described, isn't it? The durable Sidney Webb. In 1916, Sidney had published a series of studies on how to pay for the war. There, he proposed nationalising mines and mineral production, railways and canals. He advocated a state insurance department and a revolution in income taxes and inheritance taxes, or in England called death duties. It was the first public announcement of what Fabian socialism had in store for post-war Britain, and nearly all of its proposals have since been put into practice. Less than 2 years later, a special committee of the Labour Party executive issued a report entitled Labour and the New Social Order. While embodying the suggestions previously made by Webb, it went a great deal further. Everyone familiar with Sidney's cast of mind and style of writing recognised it as a product of his peculiar genius, even to the characteristic parade of capital letters, a subsequent president of the Fabian Society, the widow of G.D.H. Cole, has described this egregious document as being, quote, purest milk of the Fabian word. It began by announcing cheerfully that, as a result of World War I, quote, the individualist system of capitalist production has received a death blow. And it continued, quote, we of the Labour Party must ensure that what is to be built up is a new social order, based not on fighting, but on fraternity, not on the competitive struggle for a means of a bare life, but on a deliberately planned cooperation in production and distribution for the benefit of all who participate by hand and brain, not on an enforced domination over subject nations, subject races, subject colonies, subject classes, or a subject sex. And I just want to pause there to say this really does sound like the concoction of people who don't want to do any work. Like, oh, we really got to socialize and put all, have public ownership of all these things because I don't want to do any work and I want to get paid for just, brain. I'm just using my brain and therefore I should get paid. That seems to be the pattern that I'm detecting, at least in today's reading, is three of these guys don't want to do any work, but they still want to get paid. Carrying on with Sidney Webb's writing here. The four pillars of the house that we propose to erect, resting upon the common foundation of the democratic control of society in all its activities, may be termed, respectively, A, the universal enforcement of the national minimum, B, the democratic control of industry, C, the revolution in national finance, D, the surplus wealth for the common good. Under those four discreetly phrased headings, or pillars, the intention of Fabian socialists to destroy the competitive system of production, strip the empire of its overseas possessions, and vest control of all domestic activities in the state was spelled out with precision. The first pillar covered most of the proposals for state-financed social welfare that Fabians had supported from time to time. The second pillar advocated women's suffrage, whose vote-getting potential the Fabians had been somewhat slow to recognise, abolition of the House of Lords, nationalisation of land ownership, electric power, maritime and railway transport, and the mining and metals industries, and elimination of private profit from insurance and from the liquor trade. The third pillar supported confiscatory increases in taxation, of course, including the capital levy, which in time would abolish private savings as well as private investment. The fourth pillar foreshadowed the transformation of the British Empire into the British Commonwealth. Limitation of armaments and abolition of profit in the munitions industry, an international court, international economic controls, international legislation on social matters, and finally, a supranational or one world authority. Many of the objectives listed under the fourth or final heading had appeared in a Fabian-prepared Labour Party pamphlet published in 1917 under the title Labour's War Aims, which antedated and supplied the basis for Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, which is talked about in a later chapter. Labour and the New Social Order was a sweeping Fabian prospectus for the gradual and orderly achievement of socialism in the empire and the world, so thoroughly revolutionary in what it proposed to do that more sober Englishmen, if they knew of it at all, must have dismissed it as mere campaign verbiage. It is a document that deserves to rank with Mein Kampf or the Communist Manifesto as one of the most plain-spoken announcements of destructive intent ever framed. In June 1918, it was adopted as the official programme of the British Labour Party, and except in details such as the temporary inclusion of a birth control plank in 1927, it has never been really changed. Strangely enough, when the programme was concocted, there were labour groups in Britain who favoured an even speedier rate of nationalisation. To please them, Arthur Henderson in September 1919 asked Sidney Webb to submit a plan for nationalising the whole of British industry. Arthur explained that it, quote, would be better for electioneering, but Sidney declined to oblige. Already, Webb perceived, as some others did not, that by nationalising certain key industries and at the same time securing state control of both finance and social welfare, total nationalisation could be achieved in fact, if not in name. The irony of it is that a majority of British Labour today, after some unhappy experiences with state-administered industry and some snubbing at the hands of state-appointed managers, no longer demands speedy nationalisation, but, on the contrary, mistrusts and fears it. As a result, the late leader of the Parliamentary Labour Party and a veteran member of the Fabian executive, Hugh Gaitskell MP, was forced to take the alternate route conveniently left open by Webb and to stress the more oblique methods of attaining state capitalism as foreseen in general, if not always in detail, by the Fabian master planner. For this, Gaitskell was unfairly criticised as being a lukewarm socialist by more impetuous elements among his own followers. The question of how to satisfy both right and left wings of the Labour Party while presenting a bland, non-socialist face to the Liberals and independent voters is a dilemma he has bequeathed to his successor, Harold Wilson. In origin, policy and leadership, the British Labour Party was definitely a creature and a creation of the Fabian Society and remains so today. Guided by Fabian socialist politicians whose ties with the society were seldom noted outside of official Fabian publications, that party became the society's chosen instrument for wrecking the national economic structure and dismantling the overseas empire. Well, that last bit there, this document here, Labour and the New Social Order, that is going to be a good one to get as well. Put a little star next to that. They reckon it should rank with Mein Kampf or the Communist Manifesto. That's insane. Okay, so the next chapter is 5, Sedition Between Two Wars. But we're going to leave it there for tonight because it is getting on a bit. So how about that? What do you think? I am enjoying this chapter very much. I'm finding it incredibly, well, as a Brit, you know, as an English native, books like this actually get me more interested in politics because I feel like I'm actually learning the truth behind that system and that charade. And so I have family members who are and friends, and you know, I grew up kind of around working class people, so a lot of labor, left-leaning type people. I have a good friend who actually used to go for the Socialist Worker Party in the UK, in England, and hand out newspapers and did a lot of like voluntary work for them. And I just feel like I'm really getting a good insight and a good grip on the history behind these groups and these movements. So this Fabian Society is something else, isn't it? They're secretive, they're manipulative, they don't want to do any work. It sounds like they are really trying to set up a system where they themselves benefit and have to do no work. That's what I think. That's kind of my reading and interpretation of it. That's what it seems like to me anyway. It's like, how can we position ourselves to live off everyone else's labor? And so they kind of merged with the British Labour Party, then they sort of merged with the unions, and it's all infiltration, it's penetration, it's literally that, isn't it? Penetration and permeation. And sorry for the childish giggling earlier about that bit, the word penetration, but it just tickled me because, you know, I'm a child. So yeah, this penetration and permeation method of getting in there and having an aim that is above and beyond so what is it? There's exoteric and esoteric, isn't there? The exoteric is the external, the outward facing view or explanation of something. So the exoteric would be the Labour Party and the Tory Party, and they compete with each other, and you've got a choice between the two. The esoteric behind the scenes is like, well, actually there's groups who have allegiance. There's people who have allegiances that span that divide, and they have goals and plans which operate on a level higher than this political two-party illusion system that is shown to the masses. And this is where books like this become so important, because it's peeking behind the curtain. It's that like pulling back the curtain at the end of Wizard of Oz, and what you find on the other side of it is just this cowardly, pathetic parasite who can't do what they do out in the open, and instead have to rely on deceit and lies and mind control and deception and cunning kind of what was it? Legerdemain. There you go. That's a new phrase that I learned tonight. Legerdemain. So I'm going to have a quick review of the chats, and then we'll wrap it up. Okay. Adam, thank you for emailing me the link to that high-res version of the window. I appreciate that. Celine Lyon says they really needed to turn religion into science. That way they can make it real. Yeah, nice. Good point. Yeah, so these guys are they've abandoned God. They've been turned away from that because of the Darwin theory of evolution, and now they're replacing it with scientism. Heidi says, "Hey Nick, how did you find this gold mine?" I found it by Jay Dyer recommended this book, and then by Eoin Ratu. And then in the beginning of this book, Eoin Ratu says that he says that he's continuing the work of Carol Quigley and Rose L. Martin, and that this book is the successor, spiritual successor, and actual successor to Anglo-American Establishment by Quigley, and this book by Rose L. Martin, which were both like, well, this one's 1966, so he's kind of continuing the story and charting the progress of these plans and these people up to the present 2012, I think. This goes up to 2012. Yeah. So we might read that one at some point and have our minds blown even more. Let's go. Look, chapter 3 is the Labour Party. So I'm sure that he'll be talking in there about some of the same stuff we're learning here. But I agree, it's an absolute gold mine. It's great to see someone like, for example, Alan Watt. I listen to a lot of his lectures, and he talks about Aldous Huxley and the Huxley family in general, and he talks about Fabian Socialists, the Anglo-American Establishment, Carol Quigley's books, H.G. Wells' propaganda. And it's great to read a book that vindicates and ties, ties that stuff together. As far as I'm aware, I haven't heard Alan Watt recommend this particular book. But I think it's an absolute humdinger of a book. So I hope that explains how I heard about it. Celine Lyon says, just reading the final, and I'm not going to say that word, but it rhymes with shmamshmemic, just in case we trigger an AI censor bot. An antidote to medical tyranny. Dr. Mark and Sam Bailey. Yeah. I've heard about them. I know I've seen interviews with them. I would like to get that and perhaps interview them to talk about it. Hermit Tramp is here. UK trucker, arriving late, catching up again at the end. I hope you enjoy the catch up, and I hope you are driving safely out there on our terrible roads that we have here in my hometown now. Like the roads they're just like it's the top layer is crumbling, and we're getting down to the cobbled layer now. So we're actually like reverting to cobbled roads and cobbled streets here in the northwest of England. This is probably largely thanks to the likes of these Fabian Socialists guys, isn't it? Gwen Weston says, we call them champagne socialists. Yeah. LJ says, Keir Starmer, member of Trilateral Commission. Right. That's a great link and good to know. So we got Tony Blair, who's a Fabian Socialist. Then we got Keir Starmer, Trilateral Commission. I have a book on him. Got it for Christmas. My brother got it for me, actually. It's called The Starmer Project, A Journey to the Right. Don't know if it's any good. Don't know if it mentions the Trilateral. Shall we look quickly? Let's check the index and see if it mentions the Trilateral Commission. It doesn't mention... Doesn't mention Bilderberg Group. I don't know if he goes to those meetings. He's got a few institutes. Let's have a look for T. Socialist Society, Socialist Campaign Group, Taliban, they're in here. Margaret Thatcher, Polly Toynbee, remember her? We talked about her on one of the videos. It doesn't say anything about Trilateral Commission in here. Doesn't mean it's not true. It's very possible that they've left that bit out. But yeah, remember Polly Toynbee, great granddaughter of Arnold Toynbee, the historian we just read about here, who was funded by the Rockefellers. A little chat there about Hampstead. I've never been there, so I can't really weigh in on that. But Gwen says Sigmund Freud lived in Hampstead when he left Austria, and Gwen's visited his old house, which is now a visitors center. That guy's got a lot to answer for. Gwen saying it's a really great book. Celine Lyon was cooking, but following along with every word. I hope you have a delicious meal, whatever you've cooked, and it's tasty and healthy. Cool. Immune to PR is going to watch it from the beginning on the replay. Good. Hope you enjoy that catch up. This has actually been a pretty good one, I would say. So we're getting into the meat and potatoes now. Next two chapters coming up. We've got so this one was Sedition Between Two Wars, is chapter 5, and then after that we got chapter 6, which is Dirge for an Empire. So we got another 4 chapters on this section about Great Britain, and then we're going to be reading a much larger section on the United States. So the first 90 pages deals with Great Britain, and that's kind of the history of this group setting it up here. But then from page 115 to 444 is all about how this went over to United States and affected America. So it's going to be good. I think we are in for a wild ride, that is for sure. And Celine Lyon says everyone's still paying their road tax. Yeah, because if you don't, you get arrested. So, it's the tax you pay to not be put in a cage, as Richard Grove likes to put it. All right, I think we'll call it. That is it. I'm calling it. So we're going to wrap it up. I'll put the waiting screen back on with a little bit of guitar music to play you out. Remember, you've got my allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews has got everything you need on there. And there's the guitar music bundle offer. If you want to shoot me an email, I'll add you to the mailing list. I'm planning to I'm not going to spam you with anything. I've got nothing at the moment to send out via the mailing list. It's a precautionary measure to make sure we can stay in touch and keep this going if this channel gets nuked. But I might be looking at building things out in the future, perhaps a website, perhaps a better chat group than Telegram. My Telegram chat got infiltrated, and there was some post sent to the group under my name that was like some link that I don't know what it was. I didn't click on it, but that's kind of frustrating. So it means we've got to find somewhere better than Telegram to have our group chat. But for now, Telegram's it's serving its purpose. So you can go and join that if you want to keep up to date with things. So I think that's it. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for participating. Like, it's so amazing to have you in the chat, helping me out with definitions and phrases and words and adding to my understanding, helping me learn as we go through this. It's really just humbling to have a group team kind of community effort going on here. That's really special, and it fills my heart. So thank you for being part of that. And hopefully we'll see you Saturday night for the next part. We'll do another 2 chapters probably. That'll be 7 p.m. UK time, Saturday night. And then we'll have it's bank holiday weekend. So we've got a long weekend here. So I'll be in an extra good mood. So maybe we'll do 3 chapters and celebrate. But we'll see. We'll see how long the chapters are. Okay. So good night. Take it easy. Look after yourselves and each other. And I'll see you on Saturday. Until then, God bless.